Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and it is Tuesday, which must mean we have an interview. And it is true, as I said at the end of the last episode. I am speaking today with author Joseph Reid about his Seth Walker series. There are currently 2 books in this series. The first is called Takeoff. The second is called False Horizon. That one just came out a couple of weeks ago. And if these sound like something that you're interested in, they're thrillers, not creepy, just action-y thrillers, then I do have copies of each of the books to give away. So stay tuned to the end of this episode to find out how to win a copy of either Takeoff or False Horizon by Joseph Reid. Let me give you the description of Takeoff, since it's the first in the series. Still reeling from a devastating personal tragedy, Air Marshal turned investigator Seth Walker embarks on his first case. All he has to do is accompany female pop star Max Magic to Los Angeles and deliver her to the FBI. But when their routine flight ends in a hail of gunfire at LAX, Walker has no choice but to take the frightened diva on the run. After a second attack leaves him battered and bloody, Walker realizes he cannot trust the FBI. To keep his client alive, he must use a patchwork of trusted aviation contacts to get her home to Austin, where the key suspects await. But as they race to stay one step ahead of their deadly pursuers, the biggest danger of all may be what they're heading toward, the dark secrets that Max herself has been keeping. So there you go. That is the description of Takeoff by Joseph Reid. As I said, it is a thriller. It is packed full of adventure and action. As you can tell, I mean, it's supposed to be a routine trip flying from New York to Los Angeles, but it ends in really a hail of gunfire, and it goes from there. There is so much crazy action in this book. It's definitely a page turner. I wouldn't have survived this situation. Certainly, I don't have the training that Seth does. But even as Max Magic, the teenager who doesn't have any training either, no, I wouldn't have survived. I would have just curled up in a ball somewhere and said whatever. Well, maybe not. I don't know what would happen if my adrenaline was running, but it's a lot of fun. Is fun the right word? I mean, it's a really good book. It's really great and action filled. It's definitely a page turner. I enjoyed it, and it was a quick read because of the action. So that is Takeoff by Joseph Reid. And let's go ahead and turn to that interview with Joseph so he can talk more about Takeoff as well as the second book, False Horizon.
Hi, Joseph. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is wonderful to have you, and I'm excited to talk about your books. We're going to talk about a series today. Before we get to the books, though, if you could just start by sharing a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Sure. My name is Joseph Reid. By day, I am a patent lawyer and a patent litigator, so I litigate high-stakes technical cases for big companies and inventors. And then I've been writing books for about 15 years. My first one got published last year in 2018. That's one of the ones we're going to talk about today. And it's called the Seth Walker series, and it's about an air marshal. And the second one just came out a couple of weeks ago, so I'm excited to talk through them with you.
Yeah. So as you said, it's the Seth Walker series, and the first one is called Takeoff. So if you could give us a quick overview of that first novel.
Sure. Takeoff is Seth Walker's first mission as essentially an airborne investigator. He's been an air marshal, and for reasons that become reasons that are explained later in the book, He's lost his covert status, so he's been assigned this new job of working with law enforcement if they need an air marshal's help. And so his first mission is he's assigned to babysit this teenage pop singer on a flight from New York's JFK Airport across to Los Angeles LAX. And it should be a routine flight, but when they get there, a mysterious band of gunmen greet them at baggage claim and shoot up baggage claim and send Seth and the girl on the run. And so he's got to protect her from these mysterious gunmen and try and figure out why she's being targeted and who might want to kill her.
Yeah, and nobody is giving any straight answers in that one. So what was your inspiration for that story?
So, I had done a few different, I'd played with a few different ideas for both series and protagonists. And eventually, so many authors focus on their hometown, where they're from. John Sanford writes about Minnesota and the Twin Cities, and he does such a good job of capturing the essence of that location. I'm a Navy brat, and so I moved all over the place. And then with my job, I travel a lot. And so as I started thinking about where I could set books, the most obvious setting, the place I knew best, was on airplanes and in airports. And so I started thinking about aviation and all the different situations that you might see involving aviation in crime fiction. And that's kind of how the idea of using an air marshal like Seth came about.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit more about Seth as the protagonist. What about him do you think might resonate with your readers?
Well, he is very, very smart. He's got a long history that a backstory that we delve into a little bit in Takeoff and a little bit more in the sequel, False Horizon, that we'll talk about later. He used to be an electrical engineer, so he built and designed circuits. And so he looks at the world in this very, very technical way, and he sees the world in a way that a lot of the people that I work with in my day-to-day job, that's how they see the world, through the lens of technology. And so, he's in this new job. He's out to do the right thing. But he does have a bit of a tortured backstory, and you learn a little bit more about why he's stuck doing this new investigative job, and why he would have left his dream job in the electronics industry behind to come do this. So I think he's sort of your prototypical hero. He doesn't want to be there. It's not by choice. But he's facing these odds, and he's trying to do the right thing and save everybody when he might not be the best prepared or the best equipped person to do it.
Right. And another interesting thing that I found about Seth is that he has a fairly unique brain condition. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you decided to make that part of his character?
Sure. So he has a condition where essentially lots of people, I'm sure your listeners may have experienced, where if they're listening to music or they have the TV on in the background while they're working, they may feel like it actually distracts a part of their brain and helps them focus. Scientists have looked at that, and they've figured out that there's actually a neurochemical explanation for that. When you listen to music or when you listen to something, certain chemicals are released in your brain that actually help your brain focus. I've sort of, with Seth, have put that into overdrive. Seth always needs to be listening to a steady stream of content in his ear, and he's got a special earpiece that he wears all the time. Otherwise, if he doesn't, his brain can sort of spiral off into a million directions and leave him sort of a quivering, helpless puddle on the floor. And so in terms of why I did that, it's really a couple of things. First off, like I said, he's super smart, and I knew that I needed to have an explanation for why he can absorb material and how he gets access to material so often and so frequently. And so the idea of pumping information directly into his brain through this earpiece is a helpful explanation for that. It's also a great, as an author, it's a great device where I can have him get up to speed on any technology I need him to learn about without having to have him, sort of go off for a week and read about it. I can have him do it through osmosis in the background and get up to speed rather quickly. And in a thriller, you kind of need that. And then finally, the consequences of the condition where he can be neutralized if he doesn't have this stream of information coming in. That's a real weakness for him. It's something that exposes him, and something that can cause problems for him as the adventures unfold. And so that was the other sort of reason to do it from a writer perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am actually a little bit envious of how he can just pump information into his brain and retain it. I think
I am too. No, it's a great device. It really is.
Yeah, I think it'd be great for all the books that I read for interviews. I just need to figure out how to do it.
Just jumping in here over my dorky self because we do have to take our first break of the podcast. And I do realize that there is a way to listen to the books that I do for the interviews. It's called an audiobook. I do know that. Please don't send me messages telling me I'm an idiot. I can be, certainly. But I love reading the books for the podcast. Don't think I'm trying to get out of that. At any rate, we are going to take that first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking some about the research that Joseph did for this series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Joseph Reid about his Seth Walker series. We've been talking about the novels and the settings for the first two novels. We're going to talk now a little bit about the research that he did for these books.
What kinds of research, then, did you do for the book?
For Takeoff, it was a variety of things. It was my first Seth Walker book, and so I did have to dig into some of the air marshal stuff and also some of the electronic stuff to give his background some heft. When they go on the run, it's basically a mad dash across the American Southwest, and so it starts in Los Angeles and it ends up in Texas. And so I knew some of those points along the way, but I needed to do some location research and things like that. And then there's some other sort of contemporary issues that come out in the book. There's some gangs. Obviously, there's this mysterious gang that's targeting him. And so there's some historical research and some cultural research that went into to those aspects of the book. So any different aspect of the book has been sort of it is the product of a bunch of research and is all roughly true to life. I mean, I've made up some things here or there, but my books tend to be pretty accurate in terms of the technology being real, the backstory being real, or at least being plausible, and that's the hope, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've talked a little bit about your own life, but are there autobiographical elements within the series?
A little bit. So like I said, I'm a Navy brat, and I made Seth a Navy brat, and so issues of sort of identity and location and where you're quote unquote from are in the book, and those are things that I've certainly thought about growing up and traveling the way I did. There are autobiographical elements in the sense that it's things I've been around and been exposed to. I'm not an engineer, but I work with lots of engineers. I didn't work in the electronics industry, but a lot of my cases are focused around the electronics industry. So I've certainly taken from settings and people and experiences I've witnessed firsthand and bake that into the book, even if it's not necessarily my firsthand experience.
Mm-hmm. And as a patent lawyer, are you, as if one of your clients came to you, like Seth comes to his patent lawyer in the first book, would you be able to do all the things that he does?
I can do all the legal things that his patent lawyer does. I probably would not be as well armed or as helpful on those aspects of the adventure as his patent lawyer is.
I was very impressed with how thorough his patent lawyer is.
By way of explanation, his best friend is named Shen. That's his patent lawyer because Seth is an inventor, and Shen has a military background himself. And so at various points in the books, when Seth needs some assistance, that's someone he can call on, and Shen is able to help not only as a lawyer, but also as a second gunman or a ride-along partner for when he needs one.
Yes. Thank you for that. So let's go ahead and move on to the second book, which is called False Horizon. And can you give us an overview of that without, giving any spoilers from the first one?
Sure. So False Horizon is the second Seth Walker adventure. It's set a few weeks after the events of Takeoff. And essentially, the book opens with a mysterious plane crash. A commuter flight has gone down in rural West Virginia, and no one knows why. The FBI and the government has been called in to investigate the crash. And Seth, because of his performance in the Takeoff adventure, gets called cross-country to go assist with the investigation. And there's lots of suspects and a very mysterious sort of geography to poke through as they try and figure out why this plane might have gone down.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so how was writing this book different for you from writing the first?
Great question. I'm writing the second book in a series. I think for anybody for any writer is a lot different. You're on deadline, and so you don't have limitless time and resources to get it done. By the same token, you have to make it a standalone story where new readers can come and pick it up without having to have read the first one. But you want to, I think, pay off certain aspects of the first book so that returning readers don't feel like reading the first one was worthless or that nothing ever changes. So that balance between making it a standalone story, but also an episode in the overall series, I think was probably the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel like it is only a couple weeks after the first one, but do you feel like Seth has changed at all as a character from the first book?
I think so. I hope so. The first one, he's very unsure of himself. He's gotten dropped into this adventure completely unknowingly and doesn't know how he's going to perform. The fact that he survives and the fact of all the events that happen in Takeoff, I think make him a more confident, more active participant in the investigation in the second book. and hopefully he's a more effective investigator because of his experiences in the first one.
Mm-hmm. And this is a series, so do you have a plan for how many books you'd like to see in the series, or are you just kind of going to write until you and Seth don't have anything to say anymore?
It's a little bit of both. When I first came up with the character, I did sort of plot out an overall arc and story for him that would take about 7 books to tell. And obviously the beauty of him as a character and the beauty of the setting around aviation, I think, is that there's a whole bunch of adventures we could see in between those main stories. I'll certainly write Seth as much as they let me. I'm under contract for the 3rd book, which will come out next year in 2020. And so we'll just have to see where it goes from there. But there's going to be at least 3 installments. I know that.
Jumping in here again so we can take our second break of the podcast. I'm not sure if Seth can survive more than 3 installments of this series. He tends to get himself into some pretty crazy scrapes, but fortunately he's fiction, so he can handle it. At any rate, we are going to take that second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about what is next in that 3rd installment. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion to my interview with Joseph Reid about his Seth Walker series.
And what is next for Seth?
So the next book is called Departure. Like I said, it'll come out next year. I'm in the middle of writing it right now. And really, Departure is perhaps the most personal of the stories that we will have seen about Seth so far. As I mentioned, he's got a bit of a tortured backstory, and there's some mysteries about his background. And so Departure gets into more of those, and in ways that we haven't seen before. And so hopefully, people who've read the series and been wondering or have questions about certain things, a lot of those questions will hopefully get answered in Departure.
Okay, I was one of those people who had questions because it feels like there's a first book that I kind of missed when I was reading through it. I'm like, is there going to be a prequel? I kept looking on your website. Did I miss the first book?
Yeah, because Takeoff starts with a bang, I think, with a gunfight, and I do sort of parse out the fact that he's been assigned this investigative role because of something that happened. I haven't told that story yet. I do know what that story is, and I do have that story in mind. And so if other readers and the publisher like you want me to tell that story, I would be more than happy to.
Okay. Well, I put my vote in for yes. I don't have any authority, but I vote yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You said you've been writing for about 15 years. So is it something that you'd always wanted to do, writing fiction?
Not really. My plan was always to be a research marine biologist. I grew up loving sharks, and I was going to be a shark scientist.
Oh, that's right.
And
You mentioned that
so
in your
that's
in your bio.
yeah, and that's what I started out doing. That's what I went to college for, and then I started my PhD in grad school after that. It ended up that there were not as many jobs in science at the time that I came out, perhaps as there were before, or maybe there are now. And so I looked around and I had to change careers, and that's why I went and became a lawyer. Writing was always adjacent to everything I did. I wrote a bunch of articles when I was a scientist. I wrote articles when I was a law student. I write a lot of briefs and things now as a lawyer. Writing fiction was not ever something that I'd held out as a real career option. I mean, I think I'd sort of come out of the science and engineering field feeling like that was, those were quote unquote real jobs. But I was a voracious reader. I loved reading fiction. And so, about 15 years ago, I was on a trip and I was devouring books like I usually do when I'm on vacation. And I got an idea for one myself. And I thought, well, geez, maybe I actually could do this. Maybe it'd be fun and maybe I could give it a try. So I came back from the vacation and I sat down and I started writing. And that was, there were a bunch of failed attempts, and there's certainly a bunch of books that I wrote that haven't seen the light of day and probably won't ever see the light of day. But it was a lot of fun. It was a wonderful experience, and I really enjoy the craft of it. And that's sort of what's kept it going over the length of time I've been doing it.
Mm-hmm. So out of your journey to becoming a published author, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Persistence is obviously a big one. This is a job that has a lot of rejection. It has a lot of odds stacked against you because so few books get published, and it's so hard. It feels like it's so hard to get an agent and get a publisher and get your book out there. I think the most successful people I know that I've seen are the ones who've really stuck with it, who really enjoy it as a craft. And so all of the success of it is sort of secondary. I mean, it's wonderful when you hear from readers and your book's out in the world. That's really, really gratifying. But even if my books didn't get out in the world, I think at least based on my experience, I'd still be getting up every morning and doing this every day because I like it so much. They're books that I would like to read, and I have a lot of fun writing them, and hopefully that comes across to the readers.
Mm-hmm. And as you were talking about that, how do you balance then? Because you have a full-time job as a patent lawyer. How do you balance your writing with your job?
Yeah, it's tricky sometimes. My general schedule is I get up at 4 a.m. every day, and that's my writing time when everyone else is sleeping. So I start writing at about 4. I write until about 7 or 8 every morning. And then I have to sort of help get my kids off to school and get ready for the day. And then I turn into a lawyer, and I'm a lawyer the rest of the day and into the evening if I need to be. But basically that's kind of how I do the balancing.
Okay, thank you. And you said you're a voracious reader. Do you have favorite authors or genres that you like to read?
Oh, a million of them. I read a lot in this genre. I mean, I chose this genre basically because it's what I read the most, mysteries and thrillers. And so it's my favorite. It's near and dear to my heart. I grew up really loving, because I was a science person, really loving books that involve technology. So, I dabbled in some sci-fi like Isaac Asimov, but I was also in love with writers like Michael Crichton and Tom Clancy, the sort of the quote unquote techno thrillers back in the 80s when I was a kid. Ever since then, I've branched off and dabbled in a bunch more authors. Frederick Forsyth is a huge hero. His book, Day of the Jackal, is one of my all-time favorites and one that I go back to time and again to sort of remind myself, I think, of what a thriller should be. Same thing with Sanford's Rules of Prey, the very first Lucas Davenport book. That was a big one that really sort of inspired me to think, well, geez, maybe I could do this. And if you did, how do you do it? What's the reader sort of expecting from the author? But now the best part of being a published author is really you get to meet these people and experience them and then see their work firsthand as it comes out. So there's a bunch of great folks working now. Everybody from Robert Degoni, who's with my publisher, James Rollins. My wife and I are big fans of his. So there's just it's a lot of fun.
Nice. And yeah, the getting to meet the people that you've been reading for so long must be awesome.
Yeah, it is. And frankly, I have to say, coming to this sort of community of writers, it is an incredibly supportive, generous, friendly community. I was very, very pleasantly surprised when I was on a debut panel at Thriller Fest, with like 20 or 25 other authors. We all became very fast friends. We've all read each other's books, and we're out there, not only sort of, selling our own books, but really promoting each other because everyone is so talented that makes it at this level. And they're all just really good people at the same time. You really want to see everybody else succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. I know that you have a website, so can you tell us where to find the website and where people can find you on social media?
Sure. My website is Joseph Reid Books. My last name is Reid, so josephreidbooks.com. And then on almost every platform, Twitter, Instagram, I am Joseph Reid Books. On Facebook, I am Joseph Reid Books 1. But that's the only platform that's even slightly different. But if you can remember Joseph Reid Books, you can find me almost anywhere, either my website or any of the social media platforms.
Also, I know you didn't plan this, but I love that your last name is Reid, but not spelled like Reid.
Yes.
I'm a nerd,
no, my
but it's
whole
okay.
family is full of my whole family is full of readers, and my kids have never hesitated to point out the irony of Reid being our last name. Yes.
Yes, yes, that's awesome. We've talked about the series and writing. Is there anything, though, that we haven't touched on that you would like for people to know about your books or writing?
I think probably one of the questions I get, because I do have a lot of travel and I have a lot of technology in my books. I think those are sort of the two features that are consistent from book to book to book. I get questions about whether I've actually been to these places, and I get questions about whether the technology in the books is real or not. And the answer to both is generally yes. For example, False Horizon is set in West Virginia, sort of a unique setting for a thriller that, most thrillers happen in big cities. This is happening out in the countryside. So I spent a bunch of time in West Virginia, both in my personal life and then also researching the book, going to the places that the book takes place. And then all of the technology in the books is true to life. Some of it is bloody edge type stuff where it's things that are being developed and are really, really at the earliest stages of development. But just about everything in my books, if you pick them up, is realistic in the sense that it either could happen today or it could very easily happen tomorrow. So I would hope people would take that sort of realism away from this and go into it knowing that what they're seeing is pretty true to life.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you again for taking the time out of your day to talk to me about your series, the Seth Walker series. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you again to Joseph for taking the time to come and talk to me about this series. It was a lot of fun to read, and it was a lot of fun to chat with him about it. So if you are interested in reading either Takeoff or False Horizon, you are in luck, because as I said, we do have a couple of copies to give away. Just go to our social media pages, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on this post. This is comment on this episode, the post with this episode. I can speak, yeah. Comment on GSMC Book Review Podcast, episode 170, interview with Joseph Reid, and you will be entered to win a copy of one of the Seth Walker novels. So, as always, please do like the post, follow us on social media, do all that good stuff that helps us out. But if you're interested in a copy of one of these two novels, then just comment on the post, episode 170, interview with Joseph Reid, and you'll be entered to win a copy. As always, thank you for listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Hope you're having a great week. We'll talk again on Friday, when we'll be talking about some books that I've been listening to for middle grade readers. So tune in to that. I've been having a lot of fun with those. In the meantime, hope you have a great week, and hope that week provides you some time to get lost in a good book. Talk to you on Friday. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.